Hello and welcome to this session on the vendor return process in Onfinity. Today we will explore how businesses can efficiently manage product returns to the vendor, ensuring inventory accuracy, financial reconciliation, and vendor accountability. Let's take a look on the agenda. So here is the agenda that we will be covering today. We will walk through the complete vendor return process flow from initial vendor RMA creation to vendor return and credit memo processing. Each step is designed to maintain control and transparency throughout the return cycle. Next, we have the objective. The objective of this session is to enable you to understand the vendor return and its associated terms in the context of business processes. It also enables you to test vendor return in the context of business requirements. Prerequisites of this session. Before we begin, let's make sure the system is ready. You will need access to the Onfinity platform with a valid user ID and password. Onfinity Basic Setup and Master Data Setup configurations must be completed and available in the system. Now let's begin with Vendor Return Process, Use Case. Let's walk through a practical example to better understand how the vendor return process works. In this scenario, Sonic Ventures plans to procure 10 Samsung Galaxy S22 from Brightech Innovations. The procurement team creates a purchase order. Once the order is confirmed and delivered, a good receipt note is created to acknowledge the delivery. The finance team then processes the AP invoice, ensuring everything matches right from the PO to the GRN. After discovering 2 defective Samsung Galaxy S22 smartphones received from Brightech Innovations, Sonic Venture needs to return smartphones under the Vendor Return Merchandise Authorization (RMA) process. Sonic Venture contacts Brightech Innovations to report the issue and request an RMA for the smartphone. Upon sending back the smartphone to the vendor, Sonic Ventures generates a vendor return from the reference of vendor's RMA to adjust the quantity in the warehouse. Upon receipt, Brightech Innovations issued a credit memo and the finance team updated the accounts payable record to reflect the return and ensure accurate financial reconciliation. Next, we have the vendor return process flowchart, a visual representation of the overall vendor return process. It starts with the purchase order, where the items are initially ordered from the vendor. Once the goods are delivered, a goods receipt note, or GRN, is created to confirm that the items have been received. Next, an AP invoice is generated to record the vendor's bill for the received items. After that, a vendor RMA, which stands for Return Material Authorization, is created to formally initiate the return of goods. Then comes the vendor return, which processes the actual return of the items to the vendor. And finally, an AP credit memo invoice is issued. This adjusts the financial records, ensuring both inventory and accounts payable are accurately reconciled. Let's know your basic master involved in the vendor return process. To record a vendor return, here are some basic masters which must be available in the system. You must have a vendor, a product or charge, an attribute set instance if applicable, a defined unit of measure, currency, a relevant price list, a set payment term and payment method, a designated warehouse, an RMA category or RMA type, and finally, a defined return rule. These master records ensure that the vendor return process runs smoothly and is accurately tracked across both inventory and finance modules. That concludes the basic overview of the vendor return process. By now, you should have a good understanding of the key steps and required master data. Now let's move into the Onfinity ERP system to see how you can create and manage a vendor return in practice. To get started, open the Onfinity URL in your browser. Here, enter your user ID, type in your password, and then click Login to access the system. Once you've logged into the system, you'll land on the Onfinity homepage. Here, you'll see various mosaics, which display real-time data insights related to specific records or modules. The mosaics shown on your screen depend on the modules that are installed and active in your system. If you see any mosaics that seem irrelevant or different from what others have, don't worry. This layout can be customized. To adjust your mosaic layout, click on the Mosaic section option. From there, you can drag and drop mosaics to rearrange them, delete any that you don't need, and add new mosaics as required. This allows you to configure your home page to show the data that's most relevant to your role and responsibilities. To begin the vendor return process, the first step is to open the vendor RMA screen in Onfinity ERP. You can access this screen in one of two ways. You can either use the menu search utility and type vendor RMA, or navigate manually by going to Procurement Management. Under Procurement Management, you'll find vendor RMA listed within the Purchase Order module. Before you create a vendor RMA, make sure that two things already exist in the system: a valid purchase order and a corresponding goods receipt note. This is important because the vendor RMA requires that items have already been properly ordered and received. A vendor RMA, or Return Merchandise Authorization, is used to formally initiate the return of goods to a vendor. It's typically created when items are defective, incorrect, or need to be returned for any valid reason. The vendor RMA references the original purchase order and goods receipt note and serves as a reverse document to the purchase order. It helps ensure the return process is properly authorized, tracked, and resolved, whether through a refund, replacement, or repair. On the vendor RMA screen, you'll also see a few mosaics that help with filtering and basic analysis. These mosaics let you quickly find and review RMA records based on different conditions. One of the mosaics shows vendor returns by RMA category. This means it displays the reasons used in the RMA, such as damage or wrong item. Right now, since we haven't created any RMA records, the mosaics are empty. Once RMAs are added, both the filter mosaics and the category chart will start showing data. To start creating a new vendor RMA, click on the New Record mosaic. This opens the RMA screen in single record view mode, where you can enter the return details. You'll proceed with creating this RMA based on the agreement made with your vendor first. Select the organization under which the return is being processed. Then, choose the target document type. Vendor RMA is set by default for the vendor RMA transaction, based on the tenant setup process. Next, select the RMA category to specify the reason for the return. In our case, we'll select defective type return, since the return is due to damaged items. For more details on how to configure or create an RMA category, you can refer to the dedicated training session on RMA categories. Alternatively, you can quickly review the setup by zooming into the selected RMA category here on the vendor RMA screen. Just click the hyperlinked category name to open it in single record view. In this screen, you'll see that the setup is quite simple. You only need to provide a name for the RMA category and optionally add a description and comments to help identify the reason for the return. Now, let's return to the vendor RMA screen to continue with the process. Now, you need to enter the purchase order number. We'll use the purchase order that was created in our previous session. This one already has a goods receipt note recorded in the system. Once you select the purchase order, the remaining fields on the screen will be populated automatically based on the selected PO. In our case, the receipt movement date was 3rd July, and we identified the damaged products on 4th July. So, we'll proceed with the RMA using 4th July as the RMA date. You'll notice that the vendor details and other related information are pulled directly from the purchase order. The representative field will also autofill based on the user currently logged in. Similarly, tax details for the RMA will be updated automatically, but only after you insert the RMA line. If you see that the return policy field is showing as read only, it means the return policy has already been linked to the vendor. This field only appears here if a return policy is assigned at the vendor master level, or any default return policy is available. Without this setup, you won't be able to proceed with the vendor return process. To check or update this, you can zoom into the vendor. Now click to the vendor name hyperlink to open the record in single record view. Now, go to the Additional Conditions tab. Here, you'll find a field for return policy. If this field is empty, it means no policy has been assigned, and this vendor cannot be used for the return process until or unless there is a default policy available. So, make sure that a valid return policy is linked to the vendor master before continuing. Let's return to the vendor RMA screen. Now, select the warehouse from which the items will be sent back. In our case, the items were received into the Sonic Venture warehouse. Next, choose the payment term agreed upon for processing the return. Once these details are in place, save the RMA header. To add a line, you have two options. You can add it from the RMA Lines tab by clicking the Lines tab button, or you can add it from the composite view. For this demonstration, we'll use the composite view, click on New Record, then select the original purchase order line. After that, select the corresponding receipt line. Based on these selections, all related details will update automatically. Save the record, and your line details will be inserted into the RMA. At this stage, the quantity field displays 10 units, which is the total received for this item in the linked purchase order. If the return is for only part of the received quantity, you can adjust this value. In our example, we will change it to 2 units, as only 2 items were found to be defective. All other fields in this section are read-only and are derived directly from the purchase order. These cannot be modified from the vendor RMA screen. To view additional details, navigate to the RMA Lines tab, click the line hyperlink, and open the record in single record view. Here, you can review all related information for the selected line. You can also check the RMA tax from RMA Tax tab screen. Now, return to the Header tab and complete the RMA record. Click the Complete Document Action button, then select OK to confirm and proceed with the vendor return. To create a vendor return against a vendor RMA, go to the menu Search Utility and type Vendor Return. Here you will find the vendor return screen. Alternatively, you can navigate to the Material Management module, then go to Storage Operation and select Vendor Return. Once you open the vendor return screen, you will land on its landing page. Vendor return is the process of sending goods back to the vendor, initiated through a vendor RMA in Onfinity. The return is linked to the original purchase order and goods receipt note, and is settled against the AP invoice using an AP credit memo, also known as a debit note. On landing page, you will see mosaics that help filter records by clicking on the available hyperlinks. Since no records have been created yet, the mosaics for vendor, vendor RMA, warehouse, and document status will not display hyperlinks. Once you start adding records, these links will appear, allowing you to open specific entries directly. You will also find charts, including vendor return count, showing the number of returns. Vendor return by RMA category, displaying the categories used for creating returns. GRN versus vendor return, comparing received quantities against returned quantities. Top 10 highest stock products, showing the products with the highest stock in the tenant. Here we also have the vendor RMA mosaic. The vendor RMA mosaic allows you to create a vendor return quickly without entering all details manually. Click on the vendor RMA record shown in the mosaic, and the product lines will appear. Select the required line, and the Generate Vendor Return button will be enabled. In this session, we won't use that method. Instead, we'll create it manually. Click the New Record mosaic to open the vendor return screen. Select the organization under which the return will be processed, choose the appropriate document type, and enter the movement date, for example, 5th July after the vendor RMA process. Then, select the warehouse from which the items will be returned. Next, select the vendor. This will automatically fill in the location and the vendor contact details. The representative, meaning the person creating this record, will be filled in automatically based on the logged-in user. After saving the header, click on Create Lines From to insert the vendor RMA details. Select the RMA you have created, then choose the locator from which you are sending back the items. You can also change the locator if required. If there is another locator available, you may choose it or proceed with the same locator. Select the product. If you are sending back partial items, you can manually adjust the quantity by clicking on the entered quantity field. In this case, we will proceed with returning the full quantity as agreed with our vendor, since we have received 2 defective items. Based on the selected line, both the original purchase order and the original receipt will be updated to verify the line. Navigate to the Lines tab and click on the hyperlink to open the record in single record view. Here, you will be able to review all the details. Once verified, return to the header section. Click on the Complete Document Action button in the header panel and confirm by clicking OK. This will reduce and adjust the quantity in the warehouse accordingly. Once the vendor return is processed, you are ready to proceed with the creation of the AP Credit Memo invoice. We can directly generate an AP Credit Memo from the vendor return screen by clicking on the Generate AP Credit Memo Invoice button. Enter the reference number of the invoice document, for example, APC 1000015. Next, select the document type. In this case, choose AP Credit Memo. There is also another document type available, AP Credit Memo, Treat as Discount. This serves a different purpose within the system, which has been explained in the dedicated session on AP Credit Memo, Credit as Discount. You may refer to that under Financial Management for more details. For additional guidance on creating an AP Credit Memo directly from the AP Invoice screen, you can watch the dedicated session on AP Credit Memo. Click OK to process the credit memo. Once it's processed, it will automatically appear in the AP Invoice screen, listed under the document type AP Credit Memo. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see the generated invoice number. Copy this number. Now let's open the AP Invoice screen. You can either search for AP Invoice in the menu Utility, or navigate through Financial Management, then Accounts Payable, and select AP Invoice. When the screen opens, you'll be on the landing page. Click on View Records Mosaic to display all created AP invoices. Here you'll find the AP Credit Memo we just created directly from the vendor return. If you want to check further details, you can do that as well. If you need to attach the AP Credit invoice received from the vendor, you can use the DMS document option available on the AP Invoice screen. For now, we will skip that step. Instead, update the date invoiced for the transaction date of the invoice. Once updated, save the header to record your changes. After verifying the details, complete the record by clicking on the Complete Document Action button in the header panel. Confirm by clicking OK. This is how you can create an AP Credit Memo in the system. With this, you now have a clear understanding of how to process a vendor return and create an AP Credit Memo within the Onfinity system, ensuring smooth and accurate vendor transactions. Thank you for joining this walkthrough of the vendor written process. With this knowledge, you are now equipped to manage returns confidently and maintain operational accuracy using Onfinity.